So back to another week of our decades-running podcast with just Oliver and I, as it's always been here on PolitiBabble, hasn't it?
Indeed, indeed. Some may say the Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell of Isle of Man political podcasting world.
Indeed, yes. It's been, fascinating discussions we've had, the people we've had on. I can't really remember a time where it wasn't just the two of us.
Indeed.
Hurrah! Your favourite political podcast, PolitiBabble, is back for yet another season, filling your ears with political intrigue, an expedition into the unknown things, or maybe unknown things of politics. I'm Archibald Elliott, and as usual, I'm joined by my always has been co-host,
Oliver Sykes.
So yes, that was a rather interesting opening, but I'm sure we're applying some Orwellian state logic here, and has always been Oliver and I on this podcast. Anything else has been put into, is it the thought hole or whatever it was called? Many years since I read 1984. I know Oliver, I think, did it in English literature, so he should be, in theory, more clued up on it than I.
Well, we'll see about that. But yeah, we are back. It's been a little while, but I think it's good to take breaks from things sometimes. Not that we needed to take a break, but it was just lives got busy, especially for Archie. But we're back.
Break, Oliver.
Yeah. We're back, but hopefully more ever present in your lives than ever, hopefully. Well, we'll try and be.
Yes, we'll be appearing in your telescreens of yours that should be in every home.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's great to be back, and once again, we're looking for new guests. We're looking for a wide range of people, and do get in touch with us. But firstly, we get onto the topic, and if you've not guessed already, but yeah, I'll pass back over to Archie.
Well, yes, our topic this week is creeping normality. So, it was never acceptable really originally for Oliver and I to both be on the podcast, and now it's become acceptable if we were to apply creeping normality. But obviously Oliver was always here, so it was always acceptable. But I think it would be a good place probably to start with what is creeping normality. So creeping normality is kind of the process through which a major change that was deemed originally unacceptable is then, through small steps, becomes acceptable, and it can be accepted as quite normal if it happens through small and often unnoticeable change. So an example can be found in COVID, which I'm sure we'll discuss later, how it went really from it'd be 3 weeks to flatten the curve, then it was to be just mask mandates, then it was to be circuit breaker lockdowns, then it was just vaccines for the vulnerable, then vaccines for all adults, then vaccines for travel, and then vaccine passports, and it goes on and on. So I'm sure we'll get to that later.
I suppose with that there was sort of this matter of acceptance that people just had to go, oh, you know what, we're just gonna have to do it. It's like, the whole lockdowns, like you said, the vaccines, and people might have been a bit because I think with the whole vaccine thing, it's sort of very unclear about what was really kind of happening, and it moved so quickly that people just accepted it, and it was sort of that thing that people.
But it was a very small step, because we saw, for example, with lockdown, it was originally supposed to be like 3 weeks.
Yeah,
we'll be fine.
Oh well, what did Trump say?
Yeah,
it'll be over by Easter, folks.
It's just like the war would be over by Christmas, and it almost makes it much more palatable. If you said to people you'd have 3 years of disruption, effectively, they would be okay. I'm not going to partake. That would be kind of the reaction you would get.
And I suppose I thought, well, this pandemic compared to other ones has lasted, like, when we got to sort of, what was it, June, sort of July, August 2020, when the Isle of Man had this extraordinary amount of time where COVID was not present to our knowledge, and it wasn't really affecting us. And it was like, COVID, that hardly existed. Glad we've got that done. But we didn't know the disruption that would still carry on to this day, where people are still suffering from it. So it just does go to show that it hasn't, thoughts back then were, this hasn't lasted long. But the effects of it are going to continue.
Well, I should quite like to apply to Oliver to engage him in a line of questioning relating to creeping normality in kind of a modus ponens.
Right.
A logic puzzle. So it's the Sorites paradox. If you're listening, you know what it is. It'll help. And if Oliver doesn't know what it is, it will soon be discovered. So let's give an example here, Oliver. This is to just demonstrate how small things can lead to large things. Would you agree that 1,000,000 grains of sand is a heap?
1,000,000 grains.
1,000,000 grains of sand is a heap.
Probably. I don't.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. 1,000,000 grains of sand is a heap. Is 999,999 grains of sand a heap?
Yes.
Is 999,998 grains of sand a heap?
Yeah.
This
isn't going to go on.
Well, no, but I'll keep on going. Well, imagine it goes down. We whittle down to all the possibilities. Would you say that 100 grains of sand is a heap?
I'm trying to. During this, I'm trying to picture a heap. This amount of grains of sand. 100 grains of sand. That's probably not a lot, is it? Really?
But is it still a heap?
Yeah. Well, it is. Yeah.
So is 99 grains of sand?
Would you say a spoonful of sugar is a heap? Yes, you would,
yes.
Wouldn't you?
So would you agree that 2 grains of sand is a heap?
No, I don't.
But
think
why
so.
not?
I'm trying to think of a terminology that would
But when does it stop becoming a heap?
When it's not when it's not raised.
But you can make 3 grains of sand would it be a heap? Then would you say?
You're getting very.
Would 3 grains of sand be a heap?
I don't know. How long's a piece of string?
Yeah, but it kind of comes to the point that, in theory, 1 grain of sand could be a heap because you just take one away, one away, one away. And it all comes down to this conclusion that 1 grain of sand is a heap. But would you call 1 grain of sand, just take it away from this argument, would you call 1 grain of sand a heap?
No, because it's a grain of sand.
But would you call 2 grains of sand a heap?
Yeah,
probably not.
probably
or
not.
3? Probably not. 4?
But
probably not.
It's the accumulation.
It's accumulation.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it all goes so quickly, we then suddenly, I unfortunately don't have time to play this out, and I would probably make Oliver play out from 1,000,000 grains of sand down to 1 grain of sand, but we don't have, I think, the time on this podcast. No. We don't have that many hours of podcasting time. But it's kind of this accumulation effect shows, I think, the creeping normality in more of an abstract form. And suddenly we get from being 1,000,000 grains of sand, which we were very, very certain, at least I would be very, very certain, 1,000,000 grains of sand is a heap, to suddenly 10 grains of sand, which in theory, logically following, it would still be a heap. There's no real distinction of where we draw these arbitrary lines. And obviously we could sort of draw a table and say, well, when it's below 500 grains of sand, it's no longer a heap. But then what makes it any difference between 500.1 grains of sand or 499.99 grains of sand? There's not much difference between the two, so it might as well be a heap.
Yeah.
As this incremental form, it's an incremental movement that seems so insignificant that suddenly you get down to nothing very quickly. And a similar thing could be seen in, I think there's an argument by social scientists of why the Eastern Islanders would accidentally cut down their last tree because the effects of deforestation, suddenly it was just 1 tree. And then it's another tree, and then there's another tree, and before you know it, the whole forest is gone.
Yeah.
It's actually quite a common thing within our society and what we think about day to day. We just don't necessarily put the name.
Well, it's also
different names to creepy normality.
Well, you see it in in sort of food as well, don't you? Sort of bar of chocolate, or 1 square, it won't hurt, and then before you know,
the whole packet's gone.
And it's that thing and then you feel the effects afterwards, don't you? Gosh, quite full there.
That's a good analogy, I think, with a bar of chocolate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Probably easier to imagine than a heap of sand.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's many different names for creepy normality. An example could be maybe gradualism. Is another one. And usually there's a lot of talk about the moment on certain circles about it maybe forming a deep state and the state having more control by gradually gaining this control maybe to an authoritarian matter. And Oliver and I were talking about earlier how we saw it on our favourite news channel, GB News.
Well, certainly your favourite news channel, not
It's
necessarily
certainly not mine.
It's
Yeah.
not yours.
No.
I think it's an interesting, one to watch,
Yeah.
and I just think that the whole, it's totally biased, isn't it? And that's the thing that makes it entertaining to watch, because you see the presenters on there, and it's just got a totally different.
Well, I wouldn't say it's totally biased. They do have it is, I suppose, more biased on the right.
Yeah.
Because that was the reason it was set up, almost to be a UK version of Fox News. But there is still disagreement within the presenters.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because they're not the same person.
I just think, It's
like the Guardian for the right wing.
Yeah.
Actually, no, that'd be the Mail.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'll come down to. Have you heard of the analogy about?
One thing on
Yes.
that, I have actually watched it, and for a show that's like it apart from the sort of bias of it does still provide you well informed on political matters.
No, it is done pretty well.
No, they cover some great topics, and compared to other news shows, because it's unlike the BBC or Sky News and stuff, where there's always that international outlook and everything. Of course, they'll be covering like the invasion of the Ukraine and stuff like that, but there's a real focus on sort of the UK political issues kind of thing. So it's great for someone like me who's a politics student to really get your examples from it. And stuff
Well,
I
quite like Tom Hardwood, I think.
Yeah.
His name, yes. No, he's quite
What's
good.
the other chap? Forgotten the other chap's name. I'll look him up now.
Oh, wait, anyway, have you heard of the analogy for not more of a thought problem of the boiling frog in water? I think is that the one? Yes, the boiling frog in water is usually used as a sort of saying.
I haven't heard of that. No.
But you know, when you put a boiling frog in water, if it's in cold water and you gradually boil it up, it won't jump out. Have you not come across? Oh, I'm surprised.
No.
Anyway, listeners, you may have come across the boiling frog in water. It is a saying, quite a famous one, but in fact, it's actually a false saying, because although it does try to demonstrate this sort of gradual change and creeping normality, because the water gets ever so slightly warmer and the frog doesn't apparently notice it. It has now been proven in modern science, contrary to the old, maybe medieval science or Victorian science, that the frog will actually jump out. So it's almost of a moot example. Zug, I think, was a Harvard biologist in 1995, and he said if the frog has a means of getting out, it will get out. And he did some experiments on the frogs. And Melton also said if you put a frog in boiling water, it won't jump out, it will die, because obviously it's boiling, but if you put it in cold water, it will jump out before it gets too hot. It won't sit still for you. But we now turn to a real-life example of COVID, which we touched on at the introduction to this podcast. So it's almost a very, very clear example of what creeping normality is in our society. I think it's become almost very noticeable from all of us, and we now don't really question some of us still do, I still do, maybe having to have vaccine to travel. You know, sometimes if we're asked to put a mask on, we just sort of comply. And it's almost this gradualism that's become more part of our lives. I think a more pertinent example can probably be found in China, where they still pursue a zero COVID policy.
Yeah.
And citizens now have to accept that sometimes they'll be put in 14-day mandatory state quarantine.
Nuts, isn't it? And I suppose
mental.
the best thing with the Isle of Man now is that freedom of choice, of whether you want to put on a mask, you can. If you want to have your jabs, you can. You don't have to. If you want to isolate, you can. You don't have to. But I suppose the only thing is from then, if you are isolating, is the support isn't there financially like it was. You can only claim like
the working person's benefit, whatever it's called.
Yeah, but no, it does show how things progress.
Would you say your life's still been affected by COVID? Or if I was to use a different pronunciation, I've heard COVID being used as a pronunciation as well.
COVID?
COVID, yes. It's been used.
I think I've heard that as well.
It, yes.
Yeah, I don't know who or where or why, but yeah, COVID. Yeah, I mean, not much has changed really. Not much will have changed really, because I doubt I would be doing much different, to be honest.
Oliver didn't pay attention to those regulations.
No, of course I did, but
Mm.
No, I think I'd just still be doing the same kind of stuff now. Whether I'd be on this podcast, who knows? That
Yes.
is one thing.
This is the creeping normality has made this podcast a
Yeah.
giant part of our lives. But there was interesting when I was doing the reading for this. There's an interesting policy paper I read, which I would recommend if you want further reading, so you can grab your pencil and a pad and write it down. It's Capano, Howlett, Jarvis, Ramesh, 2022 January. The long-term policy impacts of the coronavirus, normalization, adaptation, and acceleration in the post-COVID state. Policy in Society, Volume 42, Issue 1, pages 1 to 12. It's just an interesting paper I read, and this is almost a war event. It's not sort of a short-term, maybe financial instability, maybe after, for example, '08, or a short-term, maybe fluctuation in the stock market or a bit of an oil crisis. It's almost one of those large generational scale events where it's had such a large impact for a number of years that it will inform policy decisions. It's similar, can be seen probably after World War II with the change in social attitudes and maybe the implementation after World War II, for example, of the NHS, more of a nanny state, as I like to call it.
Yeah. So do you sort of believe that the way things are going at the moment is that they're, I don't know, because I doubt that the big corporations and the people, with the money really want this to happen.
Or do they?
But,
There's lots of again, there was a interesting proponent. But
surely all this sort of struggle that people are going through are more likely, coming up to future elections and stuff, to vote for, for potentially, obviously we'll be coming on to this later with obviously looking at the Tory leadership candidates, but where's it going to go for the next general election? Are people going? I mean, we're a while off, and whether the sort of current cost of living crisis will have been tackled by then and what will have happened, but are people more likely to vote sort of Labour way, or who knows, kind of thing, for a government that
it really depends on the next 2 years again. Who wins the leadership election, which will come on to.
But don't you? So what I'm sort of asking is kind of like the way things are going. Do you not sort of see that we're sort of the reason with the cost of living crisis is sort of bending us to more left wing, kind of pushing us sort of to the left a bit? Do you feel?
Well, I think the cost of living crisis itself has almost been, I described it as creeping normality with the prices, because they slowly incrementally rise, and then we think suddenly, how on earth has, for example, diesel on the island, if you're in the UK, it's even more expensive. It's ridiculous. I remember at the start of the year almost that diesel was sitting around 120-ish, above 126. It was sitting quite low at the start because before the war with the Ukraine. Crude Brent was only about $50 a barrel.
It's going to be going up again now because Russia's cut off the supply again to Germany.
That's gas.
But still, we're looking at...
But it still hits the markets. And now it's suddenly 190. And in that space of time, you don't really notice it. But now when I think back, I remember when diesel was like 103, 104 pence for a litre of diesel, and now it's hit 190, and 90.9 or 191.9 was the price I saw yesterday. So this is again another example where it's quite damaging almost to the individual, because we don't always remember we don't say what's happening. We don't protest. We don't say, but why is our price going up? It should not be going up so much.
And I feel like it's the same with a lot of other things as well. You've only got to look at food, and for example, like certain retailers, like, I don't know, in hospitality or coffee shops. I think McDonald's, they're putting up their prices for the first time in how many years? But I suppose that will be to some people. I mean, on the Isle of Man, I think the price is a bit different because of the
I don't know. I don't.
Yeah,
I
of
don't
course,
go,
of course.
So
yes. But the VAT. So the Isle of Man, we're used to paying a little bit extra for things because we, they pay the VAT on top. But like, for example, with like Costa, every so often, I mean, there's a particular drink that I get from there, which is like they're not the frappe kind of things. They were called the frostino kind of things. Not with coffee. I'm not a coffee person really. I like coffee flavored food. We're going off on a tangent here, but that used to be about £3.85 or whatever for a medium one. Probably a bit less. Now it's up to about £4.25.
But they jump it so gradually. You don't.
What
notice.
they've done, they've changed pretty much same drink, apparently different base and everything that they use, but they've changed the name, changed everything, and that is what's. They've probably not even thought about, well, we're going to change the name, but we're going to do that because we're changing the price. So, right, if we're going to change the price, we can't just hike it up to this. We've got to give the drink a bit of a change. Probably costs a lot less, but they're making more money from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it will entice people to go and buy it, and then people are sort of, it's their go-to kind of drink kind of thing. But again, that's kind of an example of this creeping normality. And then suddenly we go, oh my goodness, I'm paying X amount for this, and things have been gradually increasing.
But it comes on to our next point of almost what, if anything, can we do to ensure that we're not being coerced in the wrong direction?
Yeah.
And it's a very, very difficult thing because we almost have to resist. Again, creeping normalities become the term because most people don't remember what happened. We don't. We all do the same. We suddenly realise almost when it's too late.
Yeah.
And it's not been a recent thing. For an example, I could put an example of wokeism. We'll do another episode on wokeism where I will actually hopefully define wokeism as a term. But it's not just been, as some may think, the past 5-10 years.
No.
It's been a few hundred years gradually moving towards this direction. And it's so gradual change that it entirely has become insulated. The Overton window entirely shifts. And it's this creeping normality that can almost change society. And it's almost the way in which you enact societal change is by moving things extraordinarily slowly, very, very gradually, so people don't even notice it's happening. And I argue it can be, in some cases, somewhat dangerous. In some ways, it can be somewhat helpful.
It's kind of like the Isle of Man at the moment. If you kind of think about it with this new, economic strategy, the Isle of Man has lived, like this, the Isle of Man has not changed much in the past, I don't know how many, basically since I've been born, there's not been much change. But now, crikey, they're looking to completely change the face of it. And that is kind of the opposite of creeping normality. The Isle of Man we've had gradual changes. For example, recently the implementation of KFC in a drive-through Starbucks. That is that gradual kind of adding things in here and there to try and change the way we kind of live and stuff.
But I think
But now with the wanting to change and boost the population, things are going to have to change a lot more quickly. But the better or for the worse, we'll come on to that later on.
We spend money far too quickly and with too much frivolity. We're not very. I don't think.
And in that sense, we don't do.
Management.
Yeah, and that for that sense as well. Like
we're just in a good time for the economy. But you look back, for example, the 70s, the 80s.
Well,
Ireland was relatively poor in that regard.
mean, coming out of sort of COVID and everything, and like Archie says, the big spending projects and stuff like this, instead of just regular maintenance of things, we don't do that. We do, we've got to do all this, you know what I mean?
Which almost we should be using creeping normality here.
Yeah.
This is an example where we want it to be seen.
Yeah.
And used.
But in the sense of a lot of things on the Isle of Man, sort of on a retail kind of basis, we always are going through that creeping normality because, a couple of new shops added here, a couple of new there. This new what are they called? Industrial estates or whatever.
And these things all pop up. I think it's also
we don't have a massive influx.
No, but then we forget what things happen. So it's almost one of the ideas where we can almost combat this idea of creeping normality is remembering our circles of control. It's a new normal is not necessarily something you're going to reverse on your own. It's almost impossible to reverse on your own. And
another thing on the Isle of Man, Archie, just to interject there, is that thing of, like, you've got one of the problems, like, locally to me, is like the Cozy Nook, and it's that idea of, wanting to preserve what we've got. And the same with a lot of things, but, that there's a reluctancy for the change, and that's another problem on the Isle of Man, is that why the creeping normality doesn't always happen, because things just don't happen because they get blocked. And
well, no, that's the reason why it actually more changes than we realise, because it goes so slowly. We've almost gone at a really very, very, very slow pace of creeping normality, where even in our lifetime it's not changed overly much where we would recognise, but it's still changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think, for example, the road quality at the moment is absolutely shocking, but we don't really notice till it goes too late and there's potholes everywhere.
And then you get a lovely new road, and you're like, this is wonderful,
and there it goes in about 4 months. But yes, we've got to remember almost our circles of control, because we can't individually, obviously, change everything ourselves. So we have to remember what we can control.
You can change the world.
Oh yes, I can. That's what they tell us, but they lie. We can, but it takes a long time. But anyway, we've got to almost observe history. We've got to remember what really happened 5-10 years ago, and keep on. Don't forget where you were before. And I think that's almost what I'm going to start doing. I'm going to start noting down a lot of things in a diary. I'm going to start taking a diary. So eventually, when I'm popped the clogs in about 500 years, because I'll obviously live 500 years, they can then be published. But I think it's very important to remember almost where we've come from. Then also, this is a bit cynical of me, but almost accept the worst, accept that history will change with these, and then ask ourselves almost, if it is as bad as we can expect, we can at least prepare for it, and then we can look at ways of almost combating it. And it will be everywhere. We can't really get rid of creeping normality. I think it's my end conclusion.
Yeah, I think it's just a part of life, isn't it? It's just something we have to accept.
But I think it will eventually will, when it reaches too much, if we reach
the one thing I don't like about
authoritarian regime, we'll eventually think, this is too much, we've got to combat it. And it's almost, we will only be able to act when it's too late. And that's the unfortunate condition of the unfortunate predicament of the human condition.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm not a big fan of with this sort of creeping normality thing, is the idea of, we'll just do this to keep, and we'll just keep, instead of, I like gradual change, but I don't like it done in a sneakily way. You know what I mean? We'll just keep doing this.
But it always is. There's always. I believe there's always an ulterior motive for anything. Anything happens, even if it's a conscious or subconscious motive. Yeah. We always have this belief that's the end goal in our mind wants us to do, and we work around ways to try and achieve that. And I say there's another example. I'll come on to taxation in half a moment, but climate change is another part where we see slowly. Here we go again. But it slowly creeps in with us. Suddenly it was 0.5 degrees, then 0.6, then 0.7, and 0.8, then 0.9, and suddenly we reach 2 degrees of warming, where it's irreversible damage caused. And we can't really act till we reach that 2 degrees of warming. And we suddenly see all of these natural disasters. We see all these events.
Yeah,
and we've acted too late because we've not noticed.
And like a lot of things, it's like I kept seeing in the news sort of when we had the sort of, it wasn't even branded as a heat wave. That's the funny thing. We go, the newspapers love to go, heat wave incoming and all this. No one was even calling it a heat wave the other week, were they? Like, I didn't hear any mention in the press. Well,
we're made. It's almost over time. Yeah, we're convinced almost for more and more alarmism in the press, and it's become more normal to see every story is trying to attract a reader. Every story is trying to have a shock factor. Yeah. And I think, personally, we'll do another, I'm sure there's plenty of episodes here. I think that 24-hour news is damaged, I think, our news cycle, because there always has to be a story. They've got to create a story that grabs our attention. Yeah. You can't have a quiet news day. Your news has to be published 24/7. And before, yes, it wasn't so good. Still, with your paper, every day had to have a good story on the front page. But it was less so than now. It's almost we sped up this alarmism in our media, or our very shock factor in our media, because we just need it. And every shock factor, you need a bigger shock factor and a bigger shock factor to keep on getting that same impact.
But I suppose the way with sort of, the printing press has to do that, and to especially keep bringing the readers back, because the way that, the decline in readership is falling.
But they've moved online, generally.
Yeah, but... I suppose online as well. You've got that input from from other people as well, with the idea of citizens journalism. So people all over the news are reporting here, there, and everywhere onto issues. And, like you've put down sort of like Twitter and how Twitter, if I want to know the latest on, like, for example, on the resignation of Boris Johnson, like, you could see the journalists tweeting.
I personally think it's damaging because you can't do something so quickly. Things need time to really bear fruit. They need time to propagate, and then what's happening. Then
we were knowing every single instant move, kind of.
But
the
thing is, it's putting it out to people who we can't necessarily. We're not politics analysts of that particular thing.
No.
Things need time really to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and that's the problem with the politics.
But then also people, we become too. We jump on everything. We think, oh no, Boris Johnson resigned. Oh no, he's doing this. Oh, he's doing this, and we become judgmental. I think that's something which is, again, with creeping more matters, become more normal.
Yeah, and
we've now become the judge, jury, and executioner before it even goes, for example, in jury trials, before it even goes to trial, or before it even goes to a hearing in Parliament.
But for us, I mean, politics is absolutely fantastic at the moment for people like us who want to know every single detail and have everything raw to us. But for the greater public who won't always have the greatest understanding of what entirely is going on, they're getting things so to the point blank kind of thing.
I would disagree with you there.
You disagree?
Mainly because I don't think it's good to necessarily make a distinction between us and the general populace.
Yeah, no.
But I think it's more. I think with anything, I think it's gone too raw. It's gone and lost its almost mystery. There's things in politics which, unfortunately, will always look dirty on the outside. If you're not in politics, they'll always look like you shouldn't have done that. But they actually produce results, and they produce results that are good. And some things have to be done which are hard, and you only can see the benefits when the result comes through. And they may look that you can't see the result from the basis of it. So from the premises, you can't see the conclusion, but the conclusion will be good. And it does erode, I think, trust in our public office, because we're judging them on the immediate policy rather than the impacts, than the implications of the policy. So we say that a policy, for example, like lockdown, that won't be good because we have all the raw information. The raw information never paints a good picture. We need to look at what's happening elsewhere.
But this is another thing.
We shouldn't judge our politics on everything they do.
What I should have really gone back and say earlier, on my point earlier, is that the politicians are feeding us with too much information, and
I think it's the media, not the politicians.
Well, it's a mix of both, I have to say. Rather than, actually getting things into Parliament, they release things too early into the mainstream media and, to people like us. And there's too much before even things have even happened. There's but
they have to. The reason is that I think they have to now, because if they don't,
the general public,
they don't know the response. Yeah. They want to know what the response will be electorally before the policy goes into play.
But this is the problem with the problem with the Conservative government at the moment. It's because how many things have they had to overturn because the public have not liked it, and this just shows that the policies that they're coming up with are just not fit for this.
No. I would again take issue with that. Because I don't think it's a problem with the Conservative government, nor the policies they put in, because the policies are being judged before they've had time to actually come to fruition, where we can judge them on their merits. We're judging something where we can't predict what will happen. For example, the Rwanda policy,
but we know the outcome.
We can't predict.
Yes, but we know the outcome of some other things, like let me think of trying to think of an example here. Like the conversion therapy thing,
but I think it was far played up by the media, and I think again it's come down to alarmism, where again it's not really been enacted. I think the U-term was right in this case, but I think the whole policy again, we decide before the policies even come into play, where we can analyse the impacts of the policy, and I think yes, it may. Certain policies may be bad. Certain policies may be bad. Unfortunately, they're necessary in the modern political climate. But certain policies may look bad to start, and certain policies may have bad impacts. But I don't think we should judge a policy. We should let it play out, and then judge the policy, and judge whether it was a good idea, was the person of a sound mind doing it, and then we have more of a case, I think, to vote them out. But voting them out on hypothetical policy, which is cancelled before it's implemented, I think is, again, a dangerous part where we've become normalised that we cancel policy before it even gets properly implemented. And 1 week with one policy, the next we're the total opposite. And I think it's dangerous almost for our political system.
Yeah, fair enough.
But I would like to come on to taxation to tie us back into creeping normality, because taxation, almost, it is as old as civilization itself. It's always been there. It's always been in the back of our minds. We pay currently a lot of tax, or even on our products. Everything we buy, even this pencil here, I pay 20% on. I pay 20% VAT. And I personally think, for one, that's quite ridiculous. But if you look at the turn of the century, we've just become so accustomed to having quite high taxation that your highest band of tax in the UK is 45% or 50%. To me, it's utterly... It's maddening. On Ireland, obviously, we have a tax cap at about 160,000, 180,000 of tax you can pay, and the highest band is 20%, and that's, I think, it's more reasonable. But you look even to the beginning of the century. In the UK at the beginning of the century, it was 9% for income tax, and now the highest rate is 45%. Used to be 9%, and now it's 45%. But it's done in such a way that it slowly increments, that we don't notice it's happening. Oh, it's just another percent. Oh, it goes from 9% to 10%, then 10% to 11%.
Well, how many?
It's not that much difference, but it all adds up.
How many tax rises have the Conservative government done in the past year? What was it, like 15 or something?
Well, there's a lot of taxes.
Yeah.
And some of them, again, Labour probably would have done more.
Oh yeah.
We face a very, it's almost a mindset in government needs to, I think, readdress the taxation system. As Kemi, I think, was calling for, we need to simplify our taxation system.
Well, that's what they're hoping to do on the Isle of Man, aren't they?
Because they're so confusing that we pay so many different taxes and so many different things where they could actually be consolidated. But I think the tax burden on the general populace has just been ridiculously high, and it ended actually with the First World War. These are why these events, like the wars, like COVID, are so important, because they actually set the pace.
It's a reset, isn't it?
They set the rate for the future policy, because never since the First World War, national debt has spiked. We've then always had to repay our debts. We have to manage, obviously, the fiscal responsibility, as the politicians love to talk about, and we have to make sure we maintain that. And I think this is, again, an example where I personally believe it's creeping normality is damaging, because we've forgotten that actually having to pay such high rates of tax has not always been there. It's not always been almost a corner piece of our society.
But can things always stay? But Archie, can things always stay the way they are? Obviously
not. But I think we've forgotten that we can function, actually, without a nanny state there. We can function without such a high rate of taxation. And we've gone to forget that. We've forgotten what we can actually achieve. And now if you suggest that the state should be smaller, you're saying, but how could we possibly cope? How on earth could we do X, Y, Z? How on earth would we not fall into disrepair? When we actually realise, you look back 200 years and the state was much, much smaller than it was now. And in some ways it was smaller. Obviously we had an empire in Britain had an empire to control and manage. But I think we've almost let it run away. We've let it all run away with this gradually moving towards a larger state. And I think, again, COVID looks to almost re-implement this because of the example, the cost of living crisis. The government maybe Labour might call, for example, for the nationalisation of our energy companies, the nationalisation of our railways, the nationalisation of this and that. And then it all becomes under government control. What would happen if an authoritarian party came in and decided, oh, well, I think this area, they're being too disruptive, I'll just cut the power to them because it's a state-owned company. We may risk, again, like this is alarmism, call it alarmism, obviously it's an extrapolated example, but the likes of China go on to do this. We see the likes of their COVID passes, which we were talking about earlier. And some citizens who, for example, went to a protest about a bank not letting them access their accounts or something like that, then found suddenly they were close contacts and were forced into isolation and cut off. And then you can't go out of isolation until your little app on your phone says you can. And the state controls that. And again, yes, the large state claims this was a local committee issue where it was bad and it shouldn't have happened and it was corruption. That's what the large state said, but it could just be playing the waters and almost saying, well, we'll just play the waters here. Okay, it worked. Let's blame it on the small state. We don't know what happened. And that, I think, is slightly worrying. I'm not sure what you think on tax and where it should sit, or if it has indeed gone too far under the creeping normality of our day-to-day
perhaps
lives.
that's for a future
podcast, indeed, because we do use up time here.
Yes,
but I do have one more. Oh,
There's
here we go. One more point on this.
Go on.
Before we move on to some a thought problem, then Tory leadership.
Oh yes,
obviously that's our last 10-minute segment. But the Overton window shift, which is it links into what I have in a thought problem later. But the Overton window, if you come across the Overton window, we might have to do. I think we might have to just
do an
sideline
explainer.
onto a whole episode of the Overton window. But basically, the Overton window is the range of politically acceptable ideas.
Yes, yeah.
Where they're ranging almost. There's 6 classifications of them. I can't remember.
Oh yes, from radical to I did have a quick look at that.
And it's slowly, I think, shifted left. If you look on Twitter, there's many memes about it. An example I think could be found in where Trump enforced almost a shift, and this is almost in a better way, but also a bad way. He's forced news networks, for example, to grapple with conspiracy theories, right-wing trolls, as on as government spokesperson, and almost made them a regular fixture of national debate.
Could I just quickly list how the spectrum of it goes? So it goes from unthinkable to radical to acceptable to sensible to popular to policy to popular to sensible to acceptable to radical to unthinkable. That's on the left to the right, kind of. Yeah.
But it's moved very left. So even what were classical right-wing ideas are now deemed as utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
And we now herald, I think this will be a place for another episode on the Overton window, because it's such a fascinating thing. But it's almost creeping normality links in, and that's the link which I think we should discuss now, is the link where we almost lose tolerance in society, if it was ever there. And we've become almost slaves to the shift. And now, suddenly, ideas like lower taxation are heralded as classist, or the simple idea that people should take home more of their money is deemed as being a capitalist pig, or being far too part of the bourgeoisie. So these almost classical ideas of the right are being eroded in favour of it moving further left. And I think I shall leave that. It's a meaty topic within itself, says the vegetarian. So I think it will form an example of another episode. But we even have creeping normality on the PolitiBabble podcast. Where do you know? I for example, I don't remember the old music, but I could play the old music. We had, for example, if you remember actually correctly, I'm trying to find the mouse here. There we are. This is a music which used to play. This is old music, but we don't remember it because things change and we forget the past. And that's almost what's damaging. That would be almost a wonderful place to end the episode, but we have plenty more to get on with. Or we look at, for example, the really, really old music, which is here. Classical jazz samba. And we forget these things. And that's just an example, even within our own political podcast, how things have changed and they've crept over time. We were originally not even at Manx Radio. And that was obviously in Oliver's day, because Oliver, as we stated, has always been here since the start. We're rewriting history. So I think we'd end in a question. Lots of me talking here. We end in a question. Creeping normality. Do you think it's a problem? Oliver should have been pondering this since yesterday when I put this on the agenda.
No, I have looked. I have looked. Don't you worry about that. Do I believe it is a problem? No, I just think it's really it happens, really, doesn't it? It's just one of those things that we're always going to see change, and we can't really control that, can we? To be fair. So yeah, I don't think it's.
But if you can't control something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good.
No,
we can't control. Well, actually, we can control. Climate change is a bad example there. I'm not going to. Although I could suddenly now profess that I believe climate change is a natural occurrence, But, for example, we can't stop this pencil falling if I drop it.
No.
But it doesn't actually make it a good action because it'll break the graphite inside it. So, yeah, I personally think, for one, that it's not always a problem. So I would sympathise with the point of view. It's not always a problem. In an emergency, sometimes it's useful. Or if we're trying to achieve large-scale change, such as reversing creeping normality, you have to use creeping normality as the antidote to creeping normality. It's almost a catch-22. It's quite ironic. Yeah. To undo creeping normality, you need to make it so unnoticeable that you're undoing it, that it ends up being creeping normality itself. It's almost the reverse of creeping normality, like the reverse of multiplication is division. The reverse of creeping normality is creeping normality. So I think I'll summarise creeping normality. This is the process by which initially unacceptable major changes to our lives can become acceptable by a gradual change and incremental introduction. And again, I think another term for this is gradualism, which I think is probably more known about. Modern today's examples could be seen as, which we didn't get onto, our exchange of privacy for convenience, our transition also to a cashless society, the incremental escalation of COVID measures. And again, modern technologies can also accelerate these or slow and reverse the progress, especially generational experience, because, for example, we can remember a time, I'm not sure if you can, before mobile phones, before social media became such a large part of our minds, if we think back further enough. So it's almost to manage creeping normality, we should avoid catastrophizing whilst keeping our eye on changes that will alter our life for the worse. So creeping normality is not always a play for the worse, but it can, if done in the wrong sense, be a play for the worse, and that's what we need to keep an eye on. Indeed. So, without further ado, we move on to my thought problem. Because I decided I put a thought problem in today's podcast, just for Oliver. And I'm sure he'll enjoy. This is about freedom of speech. So think, does this constitute freedom of speech, Oliver? I'll come for an answer after I've finished my rambling on. Too much of me speaking. Imagine an announcement on the official state news. Comrades, our People's Republic is a triumphant beacon of freedom in the world, in which the workers have been liberated from their slavery. In order to defeat the bourgeois foe, it has been necessary up until now to outlaw talk, which may stir up dissent and reverse our triumphant revolution. It has never been our intention to limit speech forever, and recently more and more people have been asking whether the time will soon be right to make the next great leap forward. Comrades, our dear leader has decreed that it is now indeed the time. The bourgeoisie have been defeated and humbled, and now our dear leader offers us the gift of free speech. From Monday, if anyone wishes to say anything at all, even wicked lies critical of the People's Republic, he or she may do so by simply visiting one of the new free speech booths being erected around the country. You may enter these soundproof constructions one at a time and say whatever you wish. No more can people complain that there is no free speech. Sedacious lies uttered outside the booths will continue to be punished in the usual ways. Long live the revolution and our beloved leader. It's taken from Free Speech by Alan Haworth, Routledge, 1998.
Excellent. I don't believe that's free speech. No.
Why not?
Well, free speech is being able to communicate to other people, and if no one's there whilst you're being, you're citing what you want.
You're free to speak.
Oh yes, but
what does freedom of speech do you include then?
You can say what you want to people.
Is there any restriction on it?
Well, of course, if it's hate speech, then that will not be acceptable. But that's where the limits lie.
But who defines hate speech? In this example, as the People's Republic, criticising their sedacious leader could be seen as hate speech against their leader, so it would be rightly banned. Does that still constitute free speech? And again, it's more in the form of a booth. If you walk into a booth, you can say whatever you like. Surely that does, in a way, constitute a form of freedom of speech.
Yes, it does in some way, but then it's limited by going outside of that booth and not being able to say what you want to say.
But should you always be able to say what you want to say?
I think, yeah, for the most part.
So if you're in a theatre, loads of people, and you just shout fire, 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 or you walk up to a street, you walk up to a stranger on the street and accuse them of horrendous war crimes, do you think it should be acceptable?
Well, I mean, if you go into a theatre and shout fire, 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 I mean, go ahead, but, not many people do.
But what do you think should happen to that person?
Well, I think they'll get a lot of weird looks from around the theatre, but I don't think necessarily anything would happen. I think
no, but you love to
reference that fire.
But they believe there's a fire, and they all try to rush for the exit.
I've heard this. Use this reference. It's a favourite reference of yours.
Yeah, but let's say that happens. Would you say that person anything should happen to them?
Well, they've caused a false alarm. Well, I suppose I'm not entirely sure, really, to be honest, Archie. But I do believe there's a limit, on what people can say. But obviously, something that's sort of socially acceptable. Not many people do say.
So you could say something.
These circumstances don't happen
but in the
very
society, in the free speech booth, you're being in society here, which we're mentioning. You're prosecuted for saying anything not socially acceptable because the state's decided what's socially acceptable.
Yeah.
I says, well, I'm trying to come to the crux of.
Well, it's
that
very,
booth?
it's very confusing.
Why is that booth not freedom of speech?
Well, because you're not being able to put your view across to other people.
So to have freedom of speech, you must be able to put it across to other people.
You must be able to express it to other people, whether they want to listen to it or not.
Interesting.
Well, what's the point of going into a booth, Archie? And I can say what I want when I'm by myself, wherever I am. But being able to say it in front of other people, that's the whole point of freedom of speech,
I agree with you. It is a bit like a computer that only can do Google searches and say it connects to the internet. It is a bit like that. I do have to say that. But almost the notion of it is...
It does allow people to say what they want, yeah. I don't dispute that,
but as soon as you start to limit, let's say, freedom of speech in the regards that you can't say things, maybe like hate speech, where it's down such a slope in my idea, where you eventually will come to the free speech booth, and in my mind, that free speech booth has just as much free speech as starting to limit what people can say, because they could say it in their vicinity of their own home, although under Nicola Sturgeon's rule, they don't even have the free speech booth. It doesn't exist. Yeah. Doesn't matter where they are, they can be prosecuted for hate speech. But it comes down to what a workable notion of free speech is. And Voltaire said, we must defend to the death the rights of the people to say what we may strongly disagree with.
Yeah.
That's what he suggested. And I think that's a comment I would agree with. I think true free speech, again, yes, doesn't necessarily come to causing people to run in panic, left, right, and centre, but it doesn't include limiting any form of speech. I think that then becomes dangerous, and it's a very slippery line of where do we come to the booths of the People's Republic being free speech compared to our own society. And I would suggest maybe we don't have free speech in our own society already, as I'm sure it will make way for another wonderful podcast episode, because we could rattle on for hours, I'm sure, about freedom of speech.
Certainly.
But I will use the same slide. No, not that one. Same slide in here. To give, I think, some recommendations whilst we're still at the time, and then we'll finish up with the Tory party.
Oh, yes.
At the end. But yes, I do actually have a recommendation for a book for you. It's not my usual recommendation, not a politics book. Although you can apply it to cultural politics in theory. It is the innocent. I won't show the cover because it has, as Oliver can see.
Yes.
But it's The Innocent Anthropologist by Nigel Barley, and Notes from a Mud Hut. It's very wonderful. I think you can pick up a relatively good priced one on eBay or Amazon or something like that. But it was published in 91, I think. 1981. But it's about his field work with the Duego tribe. I won't spoil it for you, but it's a rollicking good read, basically. It's very, very good. And I do actually something to suggest for you to watch for a change.
Oh, goodness me.
It's on Netflix at the moment if you're in the UK, or the Isle of Man, or it might be wherever you are. It's an Australian political drama.
Wow.
Called Secret City. I binged watched it on the boat, basically.
On the boat,
On the
Archie,
boat.
very responsible,
Yes.
not flying.
No, very responsible, obviously.
Was it the
and
Bananan?
No, it was a Ben McCree.
Oh,
It's a good
wow.
4 hours
Yeah.
stint watching this. And it was very good, and I continued watching.
Was
I
it a
finished
pleasant crossing?
It was, yes. But I do recommend Secret City. It's very good. And then if you want a bit of music, I'm going to recommend La Forza del Destino by Verdi. Italian. Very, 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 very good opera.
Excellent. Am I okay to do my quill?
Yes, yes.
So, in terms of watching, if you're looking for something a bit more light-hearted, you can go for the... I saw it, actually, when I was across a few weeks ago on the big billboard, and a few of my friends have mentioned, I want to watch that. Anyway, Man vs. Bee on Netflix. Quite funny, with obviously starring Rowan Atkinson, whom some of you may be familiar with as being in Blackadder and Johnny English, and of course the title role of Mr. Bean in Mr. Bean. He plays the man in Man vs. Bee. And then listening-wise, I often catch the Rest Is Politics podcast. I think it's like the top podcast in the UK. After PolitiBabble, of course. Archie's mic went up and then come down, so I had to get that in. And of course, I just like to say big up Ali Campbell. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to stay silent there. But in the meantime, what we bring you is direct from the Conservative Party. We're a little stint there. Oliver doesn't get a mic. So I couldn't resist a little bit of Elgar there to Land of Hope and Glory for the Tory Party special feature. I think this is actually the Circumpompous March, which precedes it. So I shall skip to the... That's more like it. So yes, we're here to discuss the Tory Party and the... I think we're running close to time here. But the Conservative Party leadership election, which is currently ongoing, where we'll find out the new UK Prime Minister on the 5th of September. Only I think one of us here gets a vote, and that's me. I'm part of the 100,000 so Conservative Party members who get a vote. I've actually got a hustings later today. I left Oliver's mic off there. I didn't want to interrupt the glorious Elgar that's playing in the background. But yes, it's a jolly good stint we've been off so far, and now we're going to have a new government rather soon. So,
impressive.
What are your initial thoughts, Oliver?
Well, I think it's It's a disgrace that
there we are.
2/3 of our cheese.
Yes, we make more varieties of cheese than the French, yet we import 2/3 of our cheese.
And that is a disgrace.
You forgot to leave the 5-minute pause.
Yes.
Yes.
She loves a good pause.
And in October, I'll be opening up new pork markets in Beijing. Yes, she looked very much like Wallace and Gromit-esque on the face there.
Yes. I don't know. I wouldn't. I'd probably be sort of on Rishi's side for this, but the way Rishi sort of was with Johnson, and
and Truss wasn't. Truss is still remaining loyal to Johnson.
No.
Yes.
She's remaining loyal to Johnson, and the fact that Rishi also got a fixed penalty notice, obviously, what the parties and everything happened under Johnson's watch, under his house. We don't. Will we ever really know what went on there? Who knows? But obviously, Rishi's sort of living next door and whatever. I just think the guy, he talks the talk, but can he walk the walk? You know what I mean? It'll be a difficult one. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out. But I'd like Rishi if he wasn't so fishy.
But would you prefer Rishi over Truss? That's more
yes.
the question. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's, again, it comes to the very key question in politics at the moment. who is the best out of the options? It's not who's really good.
Who's going to keep the Tory party in power?
And I think
that's Truss.
I can't. I'm not been publicly declaring my decision. You can probably guess though. I think Truss she doesn't level charisma to sell her policy. Her policy on its own isn't so bad, apart from the £30 billion of unfunded tax cuts, where we're not really preaching fiscal responsibility.
In the Foreign Office, she delivered, Archie, you know?
Yes, but I think the part I don't get is...
when it comes to the big issues.
The polls I have issue with currently. I don't know how accurate they are, because I watched the debates, and I'm thinking... how on earth do people think that Liz Truss is outperforming Rishi Sunak? Because she doesn't know her brief.
People like to lie on these poll things.
But she doesn't know her brief. Yeah. You look at Sunak, and yes, again, it depends who is the Johnson vote.
I like Sunak's direct address in these debates.
He has good direct address. He's very good with charisma. He's very good with the public face, and he can sell his policy. And he knows his brief.
Apart from, he knows brief. He cannot. One, he struggles to top up his car when he does top up his car, and contactless payments. He's awful at.
I struggle with contactless payments. Yeah. They are. It's like, where do I put my phone? Card.
Yeah, but you can.
Who knows? Yeah. But I think he's a much better front man. It's a very difficult decision between the two. The only part which Liz Truss really has banking on her is the support of the Johnson loyalists, because she's remained loyal for Johnson and has not, air quotes, stabbed him in the back.
I mean, the fact that who's supporting Liz Truss? Nadine Dorries and Moggy? Yeah.
Nadine Dorries.
Yes.
Ugh. Apparently she wrote some interesting literature. I saw that on Twitter the other day.
Well, she's got dyslexia, I think.
No, but she wrote 2 books.
Oh, really?
And they have some quite scenes which I don't know. They're sent to me, and I thought I do not. You can't unsee them effectively. I recommend, Oliver, you look up Nadine Dorries on Twitter with her books later.
Yeah.
Don't recommend at all. Don't look it up.
She said something about
mildly terrifying.
In an interview or something, whatever, and then she blamed it on her dyslexia, I think, or something like that.
Oh, maybe those things you can forget. I just don't. Her politics, I think she's the personality I have slight annoyances with. But who would you put your money on? That's our last question, because obviously we do betting here on PolitiBabble.
I think it's quite clear then. Probably Rishi Sunak.
Of winning? No, not who would you prefer. Who's the money?
Who's going to win? Rishi Sunak, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, actually, I might say Truss. Yeah, actually, I'm going to turn over on that Truss.
Why? I think it's a very difficult one.
It's tight. It'll be close.
It's very tight. I'll see how they perform in Hustings, and then then I'll make my mind up of who to vote for. I can vote from the 2nd of August or the 1st of August, one of the two. Yeah, so that, I think, probably wraps up our rather lengthy PolitiBabble, considering the time we've been. We spent lots of time on creeping normality. It's almost gets longer and longer, and we just don't notice.
Forgotten that we even talked about creeping
Did we
normality.
Start? When did we start? We've always been here. I think on that note, we end this week's episode of the PolitiBabble podcast with the music we've always used, haven't we? Yes. Well, yes, that concludes another wonderful episode of this PolitiBabble podcast. I'm Archibald Elliott, and I've been joined by my co-host who's been there since the start, Oliver Sykes. And you can watch back past episodes of the PolitiBabble podcast from the prior 6 seasons on manxradio.com/podcasts/PolitiBabble. That is manxradio.com/podcasts/PolitiBabble. If you do want to go and engage on a political debate with us, do go and get in touch on our social media. I'm sure you'll be able to find Oliver and my handle. And if you can't, well, your detective skills aren't quite up to scratch. And as usual, if you do want to come on for a program, do let us know, do get in touch, and we'll go and put you through the vetting process that takes many, 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 many months to complete.
You've been PolitiBabbled.